So on this week's Outside the Pegs interview, I've got arguably one of the greatest Grasstrack and Longtrack racers of all time joining me. He's a multi-British Masters champion, he's a European Grasstrack champion, he's a multi-world Longtrack champion, and in his career he won pretty much every title that there was to win. Such were his accolades that he was awarded with an MBE, which was unique in Grasstrack. And since retiring in 2006, he's made a highly successful career from TV broadcasting. So I'm absolutely delighted to introduce this week on the podcast, Mr. Kelvin Tatum. Kelvin, welcome to the Grasstrack Banter Podcast.
Thanks very much, Gareth. That's it's very kind. That was wow, almost overwhelming introduction. That's lovely. I'm delighted to join you.
Yeah, we're absolutely delighted to have you on. And obviously you've been in the podcast world yourself recently. We've been listening to your podcast, and it's really interesting. Some great names on there. I was listening to the Tony Rickardson one this morning. So you're obviously enjoying the world of podcasting.
Yeah, it's my daughter's idea. I was feeling quite sorry for myself early lockdown, and she said that the podcast world is booming. So she suggested that Nigel and I do something, and we sort of started quite tentatively, and to be honest, our confidence has grown, and we've been amazed with the people and riders that have agreed to come on. And I think that Rickardson one that you've listened to, I think that's really quite cool. You know, the insight he gives at times is fabulous. But no, we're enjoying that immensely.
Yeah, I think it's a great podcast. I think that. There's a lot of sort of things covered in there. He talks a lot about setups of bikes in Britain, and he talks about comedians imitating him and all sorts of things.
That was something I didn't know anything about, and when I did some homework on him, because we both, when we chatted about doing it, we didn't want to be just too formulaic by just concentrating on whether you scored 15 points against Poole one night, and we didn't want that. We wanted it to be a chat. We wanted it to be like we were three blokes sat round a table, possibly in a pub, just having a chat. And I think once that starts and they realise that it's not going to be an interview, it is a conversation, I think generally the guys they relax, and you, as a consequence, I think we've got more information and more background and what these guys thought about and why they did certain things at certain times than when it was actually happening, because there was that guard up. And I think now, certainly with Tony, I thought it was great that he still retains the enthusiasm for the sport. He watches every Grand Prix. He was very forthright in his views about Swedish Speedway and why they've allowed it to lapse. He said it was a disgrace.
Yeah.
But about the Robert Gustafson, the comedian that I came across when I was just doing some homework, and I just thought, I don't know how many people would have asked him about that, and that would have that got him going. He loved it.
Yeah, and I expect I'm not the only one. I went straight onto YouTube and found the clip, and it's quite bizarre to see what was going on there. But it's a great podcast. I enjoyed the Steve Johnston one as well, actually, because obviously Steve is a great character. But it is about picking those characters. But I think now that they're removed from the sport, I think they're a little bit more forthcoming with the truth, maybe.
But yeah, I think you're right. I think that we spoke to Jason Doyle in quarantine, but that was not so much about racing, was it? It was more about circumstances he found himself in, and just trying to give us some feedback about what they were doing, how he was feeling, but not specifically about who did he think he needed to beat or who was his main rival. So that was a slightly different type of thing for a current rider.
Yeah.
We have got different ideas for moving forward. We've got about 4 or 5 recorded to keep going. We're going to try and do them through the summer. But as I say, Nigel and I, having been a little bit reluctant initially, having been sort of encouraged by my young daughter Emma, it's provided a nice little distraction, and we've found that talking to the guys, it's been great fun, and they've thoroughly enjoyed it. So it's been good, really good.
Yeah, it's a great listen, and if you're listening out there, obviously make sure you look it up because you've that we had lots of Grasstrack people that had never listened to a podcast before us, and now that you've listened to us, there are others out there, and Kelvin Tatum's podcast with Nigel Pearson is a great listen. It's I think informal patter, I think, is a good way of describing it. It's this, you bounce off each other quite well, and I think that's sort of something that sort of brings me to the next thing, really. Your role as a broadcaster. It's firmly established now. You're a firmly established TV broadcaster, which is, a massive pipe dream for anyone that was sitting in a field racing grass track in the 80s. And you've got this amazing partnership with Nigel Pearson, and it's something that you obviously very much enjoy.
Yes, and the background to it is the absolute reverse. Because when I first knew Nigel, he was he's younger than me, although he doesn't look it. He was a young journalist working at Cradley Heath while I was riding for the Coventry Bees. And to be perfectly honest, when I first met Nigel, I took a dislike to him because he was a bit awkward, and he was always quite. He'd ask awkward questions, and I don't think I particularly. I know that when it was announced that he was going to join the Sky team, I'd been there for a couple of seasons. I wasn't best pleased. I didn't work with him initially. I was working with Jonathan Green in the upside down flying pants that we had. We had that studio where the guys used to come in. Yeah. Because Nigel obviously worked on the commentary at that stage. But things turned around. And when we ended up being together, working together, it was never discussed, and even now it's weird. We never discuss it. We never do any homework really together. Never. That has never happened. But we have a chemistry that works, and we both get excited, but we try to remain disciplined as we possibly can. But we've had a great journey, and I think that we bring. I'd like to think that we bring something to the sport. Even when it's a poor meeting, you've got to try and keep people interested and keep people viewing. So we've tried to do that. But it's been brilliant, and I still enjoy it very much.
Yeah, and it's he's you get a feeling that Nigel is fanboy come good, really, and it's that enthusiasm that just pours out through the screen or through the through the podcast, and yourself as well. Obviously, you can articulate that enthusiasm, and the pair of you together, you just sound like you're two fans that are just commenting on what you can see. And quite often you do have the sort of a little bit of an emotive reaction to certain things, but I think that you get away with it because everybody watching feels that you care about it then.
Yeah, you're right. I think that you can't fake that forever. No. To me, you can't fake that passion. You might be able to try and do it for a while, but sooner or later you're going to get found out. And I think that's one of the main reasons why he and I have remained in the position we've got, is because it is genuine, the enthusiasm. And I think that it surprised me how much I enjoyed that role. I had no idea if I was going to be able to do it, let alone enjoy it. Yes, I appreciate you saying that, Gareth. It's cool because it is I think it's one of the most fundamental points about the whole deal, is the fact that if you don't really get it, if you don't really live it, then you can't then get that through the tube. You can't then get that to people sat in their front rooms. So we do. And Nigel is a fan, and but he is. Tell you one of the things about Nigel Pearson is he's never raced. He's a journalist, and a good one, and he's a professional broadcaster. But he's one of the very few people that I've met that actually can read a race having never raced. And that's really cool because that enables me. He understands when I come in because he can appreciate it's my moment, because there will be times when he's in full flow and I'll jump in, but he has the discipline to stop and vice versa. And that enables it to work really, really well. But no, it's great. And as I say, the enthusiasm remains. And of course, this summer, obviously, we're both missing it desperately.
Yeah. It's very interesting that, actually, because I find myself doing this role, and I do quite a bit of commentary on the grass track, which obviously is a much smaller scale, but still, it's still the same fundamentals. I find that, well, I've done a bit of sidecar racing in my time, so I can talk about that. But talking about solo racing, I do worry, when I'm talking to the likes of yourself and Joe Screen and people like that, and I'm talking about racing, and you do worry that you think they might be thinking, what's he, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I suspect Nigel's got a little bit of that about it. And also the fact that he watched, speedway from the terraces for so many years, and he's working with somebody who he would have, looked up to. And I would imagine that's all a bit of a factor as well for him. I expect it's, like I say, fanboy come good.
Yeah, we haven't really discussed that.
Oh, really? I would have thought he would have done.
He's big enough and ugly enough to cope with it. But he holds his own, that's for sure. He's got a big booming voice and he's confident.
Yeah, he's great.
And he cracks on. So, as I say, I think the really cool thing about it is that it's not rehearsed. We obviously do a bit of homework to a degree, but I don't like doing too much because that can interfere with your train of thought. You need to be instinctive. You need to be reacting to what's happening in front of you. Occasionally you're going to need something to fall back on, aren't you, because if there's a delay or whatever.
Yeah.
But no, it's worked well, Gareth, and hopefully we'll continue on.
Yeah, definitely. I hope so too. And it's, how did it start? Because obviously you were still competing in the World Long Tracks when you started. Started there. I've looked back through a few videos and things from when you were racing Grasstrack, and you did always have a bit of a knack for talking into the camera. If it was sort of Bob's videos or on the podium. Was it something that you were going to pursue the whole time when you were racing?
No, not at all. I had during that period of time, that's kind of you to say that, but that isn't something that was pre-planned or certainly something I hadn't never worked on. I can tell you a small. I got a call. I think the first meeting Sam Omalenko worked on, and it was at Coventry, and I was asked to go to King's Lynn. Tony Millard actually rang me and asked me if I'd be interested to go. I said, let me check the diary. I wasn't that excited because King's Lynn was quite a drive. I hadn't seen the first broadcast. I can't remember why I hadn't watched it, but I hadn't. Nobody told me what specific time to get there, so I rolled up about an hour before. I remember the chap that ran the show was a guy called Rory Hopkins from Sky, and they were screaming and shouting and carrying on when I got there. Where have you been? Why have you not? And I said, well, nobody told me what time to get here. So I was quite nonchalant and just sort of floated in. I had actually no idea what I was going to do there.
Right.
And I'd been wandering around the pits. They said, you obviously saw last week. No, didn't see last week. Panic stations. They literally went into meltdown. Right, they dragged me off into the truck and actually got me to watch 2 or 3 races and how the program had been set up, and told me then that I was going to be doing the role alongside Jonathan Green that evening. And that's how it started. And I obviously did well enough, but obviously hadn't had any formal media training of any sort. So off I went, and that was the start of it.
Have you explored doing any other sort of broadcasting? I know that obviously the Speedway ties you up pretty good, but I know Nigel does the darts. Is there any other avenues?
I think I'd like to have had an opportunity to maybe work on other motorcycle racing, but that hasn't transpired. I'm a fan of motocross. I like motocross. Would have liked to have had, and even now would like the opportunity possibly to do something there. Yeah. Keith Ewan, who worked at Sky, who hosted the studio at Sky on the GPs, he did speak to me once about doing a test for road racing, but nothing came of that. But yeah, I wouldn't say no, but the thing is, as a pundit, I'm not a road racer or a motocrosser, so that role wouldn't be available. In reality, I'd have to be lead commentator. But I have done a little bit of that, so I wouldn't turn the opportunity down, but I haven't had so far.
No, well, it would be interesting to know that to see that happen. I think that I can understand what you're saying with the you're always more comfortable with something you're an expert on, I think, aren't you? And it would be interesting to see how you would get on elsewhere.
But I don't think that it would be fair to the sport if somebody coming from another sport that people don't know that well that suddenly becomes the pundit. The expert. I don't see that role. I couldn't envisage me having the wherewithal to actually comment on other riders when I haven't done it myself. I feel quite strongly about that. In actual fact, I feel quite strongly about the fact that, particularly when you're commentating and having to give opinions on world-class riders, if you haven't been a world-class rider, that puts you in quite a vulnerable position, because you can actually then, if the rider dislikes what you've said, and that does happen, I can assure you.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Then if you haven't been in a similar environment and don't understand that scenario, then you can potentially be, you can be criticised, and rightly so. You don't necessarily have a leg to stand on, in my opinion. I think that's important.
Yeah, that's very good. It's integrity, isn't it? I think it's very important of your role, definitely. But we're on the Grasstrack Banter Podcast, so I suppose we better turn our attention to Grasstrack for a while, Kelvin. And I was amazed just before we came on. Kelvin said that he's sort of never been able to talk about Grasstrack at any length on any platform, which is amazing, really, given the fact that you all of the things that you achieved on the grass and on the long track. So I can't wait to get into all of the different things for your Grasstrack career. But starting at the beginning, of course, your father, Martin, or Spud, as everyone referred to him, was a fantastic grass tracker, British champion several times over, double British champion one year in '57, I think. Right. So what's your early memories of grass track as a sport from the very word go?
I think from memory, my dad retired from racing when I was very young. Like 2 or something like that. Yeah. So I haven't got a lot of memories from when he rode. And of course, my dad is from the generation that doesn't talk about a lot of things. I've sort of got to know about what he got up to generally as time has gone on, and as he's got older. So I know a little bit about what he got up to. Particularly when he started riding on the continent, but he was a bloody good rider.
Yeah,
and he was the first one to introduce the speedway type frame, and he was a good engineer. And he was a Bevan boy, so during the war when he was called up, and then he came back from the mines, and then went to work with Arthur Wheeler's motorcycle shop in Epsom. And during that period, he gained an awful lot of expertise about all sorts of areas of motorcycles regarding engine work, welding. So, he had a lot of those skills that I don't have, but he was also a very good rider. So, I guess the DNA comes through him, certainly.
Yeah, certainly, because, you and your brother are both very good riders, and he I don't know how much he had an influence on your careers once you'd got going.
Huge, I would say.
Yeah.
We were schoolboy motocrossers, obviously, for a long time, from when we were very young up until teenage years, and both of us were quite successful at that. And I didn't actually have any ambitions to be a grass track rider at all. It was all about motocross when we were kids. And there's no doubt that when I decided that when I came out of the schoolboy ranks from motocross and then ended up being an adult, the races were longer, I was very small, it became an endurance test, and I kind of fell out of love with it relatively quickly. And that's when I wanted to try grass track, and that was very early 80s. There wasn't a tremendous amount of enthusiasm initially, because I think it was a bit of a shock to both my parents that I was going to change tack. But once we had a bit of a go, I think he was quite happy to support me on the grass, and it sort of got him going and got him reintroduced to the sport. Speedway was a problem for him initially, big problem. He didn't like that, but the grass he was pretty cool with.
Yeah. And so you never really did any junior grass track then? It was sort of straight into the adults.
Yes, because we'd spent every weekend dashing around the country riding motocross bikes. And as I say, up until I was 17, never had any plans to be a grass track or a speedway rider.
And then by sort of 1982, that must have been quite early in your career. You're already very quick, and that must have been, must have fueled the enthusiasm, knowing that you were on the pace with the top riders in the country straight away. I mean, I think it's 83. I think your first Masters, and you were right up there.
Yeah, it was. It all happened very quickly, and I think I was a bit wild, as you are when you're a youngster. But I certainly wasn't. I'd done a lot of racing. I think that's what helped me. I'd done a lot of racing because I'd been racing since I was about 6. So racing and the environment of being at a meeting, that didn't faze me at all. And I think I was so excited to be in that new environment, new arena. The racing, the type of racing, the explosive type of racing that Grasstrack was, really suited me down to the ground. Didn't have to sort of pace yourself at all. The tapes went up and you went flat out.
Yeah.
And you could hold your breath and then get to the checkered flag. So, yes, I was a little surprised that it happened quite as quickly as that. But after being really quite down in the dumps about the motocross, because I'd fallen out of love with it, I think that finding something that I was excited about and enthusiastic about was great, and I think that also helped with my performances.
Yeah. And obviously those early days you were making some serious waves in the Grasstrack in the UK, but then something came along, the speedway came along, and you moved that sort of direction then for many years. Was it difficult to, you obviously come into the Grasstrack and enjoyed it. Was it difficult to make that move onto the speedway?
No, it wasn't actually. I think at the end of 82, when you start talking about it, I then bought a speedway bike, the first one I saw, absolute heap. And my dad was dead against it. He didn't like the idea of me going on the speedway initially. And then I started going to Hackney and started practicing through that winter when weather would allow. Purely by coincidence, ended up riding in the Hackney junior team when somebody got hurt, won a couple of races, didn't get asked to ride for Hackney again, but got asked to ride for Wimbledon, who I was racing against. The week I did a junior match for them, won a few races, and this is where a contact with my dad did help. My dad knew Cyril Maidment, who was there then team manager for the Plough Lane, and Cyril took a chance on me and signed a team where he had like a gap at the bottom for a kid, got invited to the press and practice day. At this stage, I can quite honestly say I had absolutely no desire to be a speedway rider and didn't even really understand what that meant, but ended up doing well at the press and practice. Malcolm Simmons spent a bit of time with me, and I was offered the number 7 role for Wimbledon Dons in 83. And to be honest, Gareth, that was more exciting than working in the parts department at the Toll House Garage, which was a Toyota dealership, which the family owned. So, that's how that happened. And of course, that was in the week and riding in London, and that was very exciting.
Yeah, and it sort of over time, your attention on the Grasstrack waned a little bit. I think that to start with, you were racing the grass every weekend, and then over time, the Grasstrack appearances got less and less, to the point where 1 or 2 meetings a year, I think, in the end, when before you made your sort of not comeback, but there was a revelation that came with it later. So we didn't sort of see you as much on the grass for a long time there.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and I think that my focus of attention was just to become a good speedway rider and be as good a speedway rider as I could be, and I was earning money. It was exciting. It was an adventure. It was happening all the time, and particularly when I went up to Coventry, I was starting to ride in international events, test matches, world championship qualifying rounds. A lot of that stuff happening at weekends. I didn't have that took up all my energy and all my time, I think. And the grass track got put on the back burner, as it were.
Yeah. It's we all of the Grasstrack fans and people that follow Grasstrack fully understand, and actually there's a little bit of pride, I think, when we see Grasstrack riders doing so well on the speedway. But it's still sad, and it's something that plagues the sport even today, is that we cultivate these fantastic Grasstrack riders, but perhaps they spend the primary years of their careers on the speedway, and it's very difficult. We understand it, of course, but it is a very difficult situation.
Yeah, it's not an easy one because, being a grass track rider in the UK is an amateur say. It's a hobby.
Yeah.
So trying to combine a hobby and a job at the same time becomes quite difficult. And I think there are some people that get a bit upset about that. But if they were in the same situation where you were being asked to ride 45 times a season and you're getting paid and it's a professional environment and you're dashing all over the country, that unfortunately initially then there isn't necessarily time, particularly when I moved to suddenly doing international racing on speedway as well. There just wasn't the opportunities to do it all. I wasn't in a position to be able to do that. So I think that the for some period of time I tended to move away from the grass track. So the grass track racing unfortunately got put on the back burner, and it wasn't really until later in the 80s where I did one or two meetings, and there was what I would say about that, as much as I was excited and making progress on the speedway, I know that in the back of my mind it was something that I always wanted to do, and I always wanted to, because my dad had been out on the continent and done the long track racing, it was something that I wanted to experience, definitely.
That was the question really, is that there was sporadic grass track appearances throughout your career. You did the odd one or two here and there, did a few British Masters, and Ace of Aces was something that you often tried to do. But then, in my mind, there was 1994 right at the end of the season. There was an Ace of Aces meeting, and the weather. It's on YouTube now, and the meeting is absolutely atrocious. I'm sure you remember it well, but you had your gating gloves on that day, and you won the meeting, and you were absolutely flying at that meeting. I'm sure you remember that meeting well as well.
I do. It shouldn't have happened. When you get towed in, the alarm bells start ringing, don't they? And it was an incredible day, and it was the first season where I was really starting to think seriously about, having a good go at the World Long Track Championship and so forth. And I'd made the World Long Track final that year, and Mariansky Lasny when Simon won his fifth title, and I'd gone through there, and I'd made the contact with Hans Zerk, and he'd brought that bike over for me to ride. I'd ridden that bike in the world final, and it was so fast. I couldn't believe how fast it was when I was very privileged, and that's a big story, that is, with the Zerk and Tatum connection. We might need a separate podcast for that alone. Because of the story with my dad and how he met him and how he helped him out of the East and into the West. That really is quite cool, that.
Yeah, but we'll book you for the next podcast then.
Yeah, that really is quite a special story. But the Zerk influence at that stage, which was at the very early stages, he took a chance with me because of the contact with my dad. That's a big story. I came second in the qualifier in Farkirchen, made the Mariansky World Final. The bike had a problem in the World Final, just missed out on the final on the day. That bike came over for the Ace of Aces with one of the German lads. I think Hans might have even been there, to be honest. He was there. But I was so pumped to get on that bike, and I don't think I've ridden in a wetter meeting. I don't think anybody has.
No, it was unbelievable. It was absolutely unbelievable.
It shouldn't have run, really. It shouldn't have run. It destroyed the track, and that was a great shame.
Yeah.
But I was delighted to win, and I was just riding. Suddenly, I found myself doing something that I could really exploit. And once I got in the right kit, I felt very, very confident.
Yeah, that explains it really, because from a fan's point of view at that point, you'd always, like I say, you'd done sporadic grass tracks, always been in amongst it, but never looked like winning anything. And then from that Ace of Aces onwards, everything just took off. Everything seemed to take off. Every single time you turned up at a meeting, it looked like you were going to win the thing. And it was a real turning point. And obviously that year, the following year, 95, you were the first rider to win the European Grass Track in Holland, and then you won the World Long Track as well the same year after the runoff with Simon Wigg, which must have been, if you need something to show you that you've arrived on the world scene, a runoff for the World Long Track with Simon Wigg is a fairly good way of establishing that, I think.
Yeah, it was unreal, Gareth. It was unbelievable. And the whole year was, because I made a big decision to I'd fallen out of love with Speedway in this country. That was me, not them. That was me. I just moved around and it hadn't worked out for a year or two. And I thought there was an opportunity at 30, 31. If I was going to make it out on the continent, I needed to do it then. I needed to go and do it. So I dropped the league. I had Swedish League on Tuesdays. But apart from that, I had 2 meetings booked. One was at Plackling in April, and there was one somewhere else, can't remember. I went to Plackling, came third, and then I picked up a few contracts. And that season, I had one bike, a red high-ace Toyota van, and a spare wheel and a mechanic. And I thought we might ride once a month. We ended up riding all the time. We were going everywhere. I mean, we went to... I can't. What did I do? See, that season, 95, we're talking about, aren't we? We're talking about 95.
Yeah.
Bought 2 engines from Zurich, and I blew one up at Herxheim after being, this is May, at the Ascension meeting, on the big open meeting. And Hans had lent me an engine that looked like he'd dug it up out of the garden. And he said, if you use that, you've got to pay me 600 marks. I thought, well, I'm not bloody using that. I've got a brand new one, and it'd just been serviced and the bill had been fairly steep. But I thought, right, okay. I went down the back straight for the first lap of practice, and it just dropped a valve and absolutely destroyed itself. I mean, shrapnel everywhere. So I've come in, I'm just not best pleased. And I'm talking to Kevin Hauser, who was my mechanic at the time, smashing bloke. And he said, we'll have to get the other engine in. I don't want to use the other engine. I've got to pay for that. And look at that thing, it's all in bits. Anyway, bolted it in, went out, finally got out for the last flick training, did the fastest time. Gerd Riss, who was there, who was nigh on unbeatable, in the first heat, I passed him. And it was just incredible. And I think I didn't win. I won the final. I had a puncher in the semi-final. I think I ended up second. Wiggy was there, good meeting, really good lineup. And that was the beginning. That was a really strong result. And I remember Hans, we had to drive to Leerta the next day to take the stuff back. And I was meant to pay. And he said, no, that's it. Because I'd rung him, and I think I was drunk because I'd had one of them wine showers and I hadn't eaten all day. And I was just a bit... they were at Ludinghausen, which is on the same day.
Yeah.
And... my brother and I had slept in the van, and we parked up outside his huge Ford garage, and we'd said, anyway, he just said no, and I gave the engine back, and I showed him my one that had fallen to pieces. You can forget about your engine. It's my engine. He said no. Anyway, our trip was about a fortnight later on another bank holiday, and he said, I said, well, what about engines for there? He said, no, don't worry about that. So we drove to that meeting with one bike, no engines. And I thought, and he wasn't easy to get hold of in the week because he was busy running the company and all the rest of it. And it felt really strange going to a big meeting without engines.
Yeah.
Anyway, he did turn up and we had engines. But then we went to, and as I say, the whole season just kept getting better and better. The momentum for that season just kept rolling on. The European final turned up. Didn't enjoy it. It was it Yarra? I think it was Yarra. Deep black sand. You ridden out there?
No, I've seen a video of the track though.
Tough.
And it's typical Dutch track, yeah.
Oh, mate. And I'd had a lot of trouble with the machine examiner because my bike was underweight and he wouldn't pass it, and he wouldn't let me put ballast on it, and there was a whole great big fight about that. Anyway. And I was in heat 1, and my bike was in the scrutineering tent for about an hour and a half. Anyway, I got to the final and it started raining, and they had a riders briefing and I was the top scorer for the final, and there was a riders briefing, and they were talking about like postponing it, and I thought, no, I'm not coming back here. I can't do it again. And I was like, I think I was and I just put my hand up straight away and I said, we've got to finish this now. This is crazy. We got 4 laps to go. Let's just get it done. And somehow, I don't know, but that resonated, and we got out there. It was howling down. I had gate one. And the green light came on. The tapes went up. I was definitely rolling. And boom, I hit the front. Burnt Diener. Have you heard of a rider called Burnt Diener?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was there. He was very useful in the sand.
Yeah.
Very useful. I knew if he hit
still
the
is.
front. Yeah, amazing. I knew if he hit the front, I wouldn't pass him. I wouldn't get by him. And I hit the front, and I won the European Championship. So that was cool. That was really cool.
Another meeting in appalling conditions that you've won. You were getting yourself a bit of a rep at that point, I would imagine.
Yeah, and I didn't have a great rep on the speedway for riding in the wet. I think I was sort of a bit of a fair weather player, but I pulled it off, and boom, that was it. And then, like literally 2 weeks later, it was Schiesel and the World Long Track final. And that was a hell of a day. I mean, what a roller coaster of emotion that was. You know, I was started well, then blew up an engine, dropped 5 points, then made the final. Carl Meyer out in front. He packed up. I think there was a restart as well in the final. Meyer would have won. Then he blew up. We passed Marvin Cox on the inside of the track to get in the final. I mean, it was just an incredible day.
Yeah.
But I can remember something very clearly is that when we did the coin toss for the gate positions for the runoff, we tried to make light of it, and I was just looked at him and I looked through him, and I won the coin toss and I took the inside gate. My spare bike was not as good as my number one bike, and I knew I had to hit the front, and I made a good start. I've seen the race a couple of times. I'm so kind to him in the first 2 laps. It's frightening. I gave him every opportunity to pass. I never weaved. I never filled him in. I never did anything. I think it was like lap 3 when I was literally running on fumes, because when I got to the first corner, I thought, great. And then I thought, Christ, it's a long way to go.
Yeah.
It's a long way to go. I think in the end, on the last lap, he actually ended up getting a puncture. But I did have the race won, and that was a very special moment.
It was a wonderful rivalry at the time. I mean, I remember that. I remember all of that. You know, being in Britain and that news coming through. And Wiggy had obviously been, dominating the long track at that time. So for you to beat him was almost, revolutionary, really. But then they reenacted the runoff at the Ace of Aces that year, and there's 2 things really about that. The first thing that I remember is on the local news channel Meridian, they had yourself and Simon on there, and one thing you talked about is having the small van, and obviously Simon had this bloody great van with his name splattered across it, and he's all bright green and everything else, and they made light of that, and I remember that sticks out in my mind quite clearly. But then the runoff itself, Wiggy actually got in front of you, and then you overcame him and beat him in that runoff as well, just to rub a bit more salt into the wounds at the actual Ace of Aces. And I've always wondered if that was a staged race, or if that was actually how, was it an actual race? We were actually going for it.
My memory is that was a proper race.
Yeah.
I don't remember having any discussions with Ian Barclay or Simon about making it, and certainly Simon wouldn't want to get beat.
No.
So
not on that stage. It's quite interesting because you had 2 riders there, and there could have been the situation. It's the big opener to this big event, and the Aces in '95 was a fantastic event, and you had this big opener, and it could have quite easily been that either yourself or Simon made the gate, and you just followed each other around for 4 laps, but there was this incredible race between the 2 of you. Like, nobody saw it coming.
No, it was a good idea, and I think Ian Barclay had that flair, and he tapped into it. He recognised that suddenly he had, the current world champion and the 5-time world champion, and they were both British. They were at his track, and he was going to make the most of it, and fair play.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of media. We actually went on breakfast TV, he and I, Patrick Swayze was there, and he adjudicated. I mean, it was bizarre. I mean, a lot happened off the back of that win in '95, and it actually did Simon some good because, you know, the rivalry between two British blokes certainly brought it to people's attention. It was quite incredible, really, and it was great. It was really cool, and. But yeah, that day I know that Simon would have wanted to beat me and vice versa, and there was a healthy respect between us. It was difficult. I know it was difficult for Simon because he was the man, and then suddenly I was beginning to steal some of his thunder. But I respected him. He could rise to the occasion, and he didn't win five. You don't win 5 World Long Track finals by being lucky.
Yeah.
So. You know, and you're right. It gave me, when I won a run-off with him, it was really cool because it gave it great credibility. So, you know, for that, I'm really very grateful. But that day at the AC Races, do you know what? In the end, I won that meeting, but I was running out of steam. I mean, the whole season had been so euphoric, you know, with dropping British Speedway, going out onto the continent on this new adventure, winning the European Championship, winning the World Long Track Championship. I don't know why I didn't win the British Championship. I can't tell you why. But by the Ace of Aces, by the time I got to the Ace of Aces, I was exhausted, mentally exhausted. It's October. You've done a lot of racing. And after that meeting, I won. I think Mark Loram pushed me really hard, I think. And I didn't have another lap in me. I know I didn't have another lap in me, but I won, and I thought, I'm done now this year. I'm done.
It's a magic.
It was a great day. It was a great day. It was a brilliant event.
Yeah, magic meeting. I mean, the Ace of Aces always was, but that '95 one
was going good, I think, and who else? I don't know how Wiggy got. Wiggy would have been in the final, I'm sure. I can't tell me who else was there. I can't remember.
Yeah, Wiggy made the final. I think he broke down in the final actually. Joe Screen, I think, was there or thereabouts. Robert Bath was going very good at that meeting, as he always did. But yeah, I mean, it was.
So it was a good lineup.
One of the best that they ever had, I think. Certainly, right. You know, that was before they dropped down for the last one to 24 riders, and I think that was possibly a good lineup as well. But the '95 Aces, the lineup was just
stunning,
unbelievable, absolutely. Just where are we now? We're sort of 25 years later, and we're still. Rarely goes a podcast where we don't mention the Ace of Aces because it's the yardstick still.
Yeah, and even the Germans, you know, they loved it, and it had great resonance. It was a meeting that was well respected around Europe, no question about it. And I know that not all the boys wanted to come over for it, but periodically, I think Ian got most of the top boys there at some stage, and he got great names from the Speedway as well. So he got Speedway fans in there, and it was a great blend of Speedway and Grasstrack all coming together for an end of season carnival. And you know, when the weather allowed, it was one hell of a shootout, that's for sure.
Yeah, and even when the weather didn't allow it, was still a good meeting. I mean, you watched the video of the '94. There's a massive crowd. Like, what are they doing? They're stood in a farmer's field, getting soaked, and it's fantastic. Absolutely brilliant.
I was very pleased it wasn't my bike.
yeah, that's right. I mean, we've sort of. Nowadays we have a lot of sniping about tracks and things. You know, the tracks, sometimes you can get a really good track, sometimes they're quite rough. But I mean, the Ace of Aces tracks, they were never super smooth. You know, you ended up pebble dashed with stones.
Oh, I mean, that '95 track, I mean, the bike was leaping around everywhere. I mean, and it was that's what I'm saying. Like, while I was exhausted physically and mentally, I was shattered after that meeting. It's a long day, the whole thing with Wiggy. The race off at the beginning, and then the long day they got your money's worth, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But no, it was a true test of man and machine, that's for sure.
Yeah, and often they were in those days. They really were. I mean, the Masters the following year, after that, so '96 was your first British Masters title actually. You were the second person. Interesting little stat. Second person to be the son of a British champion to win a British championship. Martin Hagan being the first. Right. That's an interesting little tidbit for you. But that was again, the first round was at Andover on a very small track. It wasn't a normal sort of Ace of Aces track. And then Dalton Barracks was the second one. Again, another quite rough track, but obviously brilliant. But you went through both meetings unbeaten, which hadn't been done before. So obviously 96 form was pretty good as well.
Yeah, I guess so. Do you know, I'd forgotten that.
Yeah.
But thanks for reminding me, because it's a nice memory. I wasn't a great fan. This is going to disappoint some Grasstrack people. I'm sorry, but I wasn't a great fan of the tracks here.
No.
But I knew that if I was going to pursue that career, that I had to crack it here. And it was difficult, first of all, coming to terms with riding on smaller, bumpier tracks. And secondly, also adapting to those smaller, bumpier tracks, having come back from riding regularly in Germany and France and the Czech Republic and places like that, where the tracks were much bigger and much smoother. So you got into a different style of riding. So always coming back to the UK, whether I was world champion, European champion, whatever, particularly at that time, you knew that you were going into an environment where you were not necessarily at your... It was never my greatest strength or my greatest love, but it became a challenge that... And I think a lot of people were surprised because, as you rightly say, I used to sort of mess around mid-pack, I never really enjoyed it. And that's why I think I flitted in and out for a while. But once I got going, and I just thought, right, I'm going to do it. And it was like this real sort of character building exercises, because they were tough physically. Yeah. They were difficult to ride. And as I say, the stark difference between riding in Europe and then coming back to do the Masters was difficult, and to win and to be tough to beat, I think I was pleased about. I think it surprised a few people, that actually.
Yeah, I think that you're around that time you would have had immense pressure on your shoulders, given the fact that you'd achieved so much on the long tracks and the European, yet to win a Masters at that point, of course, and it would have been something probably that would have you'd have carried with you, but. You soon got to grips with these difficult tracks, and they are very difficult tracks. But sort of speaking about difficult tracks, the '96 season was the last time at Herxheim, the last time they had the long track world final on the one day. And you other than mechanical problems, you had a fairly decent run, 5th place in the end, which was probably due to problems with the machine. But then the following year, they went to the multi-round world long track. And you didn't take part in the first one, but the second season that they did it, there was a whole range of different tracks and different styles required. There was the first round, I think it was Adua, which was bumpy and grippy and all sorts, and then you had
the beginning of the end.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I was getting at, really. Is
that was the beginning of the end. Long track racing shouldn't be over a Grand Prix series, in my opinion. And there were several of us that felt the same. We were led down the garden path by somebody on that. That's why the top riders, and Tommy Dunker won in '97, but the top riders stepped away. We came back in '98 because the FIM weren't going to change their minds. But long track racing, we ended up riding on 500-metre grass tracks.
Yeah.
Which didn't make any sense at all. And it never had been that safe. So all of a sudden, the parameters, and they were trying to copy what Speedway was doing, but long track racing isn't Speedway, and it isn't today. So I don't think that the sport has benefited for that change. You would have a much more interest in long track racing now if you had a big one-off day where the spotlight could be on the sport instead of having fairly low-key events spread around Europe. It never made any sense to me at the time, and it still doesn't, which is a shame. But they've stuck with it. I think there's more. They feel the more meetings they run, the more revenue they get from clubs. But I just think that those world finals, and because long track racing has become more of a hobby, whereas Speedway is still much more of a job, I still think that would enable the long track racing to have at least one big day a year where you might, even if there was a situation where there was a couple of qualifiers, you might get one or two decent Speedway riders having a go at it as well, But now when you've got clashes of dates with Grand Prix and things like that, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. But No, the tracks changed, and we were in Marmande, we were in Morizet, we were possibly Mulhoff. Can't remember. I don't know if Collier Street was being used then, possibly. But yeah, it was a whole variety. You had to be an all-round rider, that's for sure.
Yeah, it was a big change, and I mean your opinion is a popular one on the Grasstrack Banter Podcast. To be honest, we tend to agree with that, and everyone we speak to seems to. Graham Hurry is quite vocal about his thoughts on it, and people could blame the likes of Graham for being a little bit old school in his thinking, but the younger people were the same. We agree that a long track is a long track and a grass track is a grass track, and to have a situation where you're expecting your world long track champion to be a good long track rider, a good grass track rider, a good Marmande rider, whatever you would call Marmande. I don't know where it's somewhere in between. Well, not even in between, but
that's a grass track.
Yeah, but it's and then there's a speedway track as well for 2020 as well, which was supposed to take place in Poland. And
don't understand it, don't get it. I think that if you think back in years gone by, Eric Gundersen would never have been world long track champion if he'd had all that.
No.
Eric Gundersen won the world long track champion because it was at Herxheim or wherever he won it, at Farkirchen, I don't know. But he certainly wouldn't have entertained the idea of going to Marmande or Morizet or Collier Street. He just wouldn't have done it. And he was a long track rider, and he was a brilliant speedway rider, and he was an excellent long track rider. But that other side of the skill, obviously, I kind of came to terms with it because I'd figured out how to ride in the UK, so that did stand me in very good stead for that new series of being able to be adaptable to all sorts of conditions, and that was obviously quite rewarding in its way. But the long track championship should be a proper sand track, not. You can't go to Marmande and that be part of the World Long Track Championship because it's a grass track.
Yeah, yeah.
So they just blurred those lines because they wanted to create a Grand Prix series because they wanted the revenue from more meetings. But it was actually, if you look back on it, it's been detrimental to the profile of long track sport and grass track in some ways.
Yeah,
definitely. It hasn't improved, has it? It hasn't.
No, 100% agree. It's numbers are down. Rider numbers are hugely down. I mean, in the UK, we've got the most riders of any other European country at the moment. I think who are riding grass track bikes because they tend to go motocross bikes in other countries. So numbers are down. Tracks are looking dilapidated. I don't know if you've been to Marianski for a few years, but it's a shadow of its former self. It really is. And it's a sad state, really. But having said all of that, Kelvin, you still managed to take part and and have some very, very good rides in the multi-round World Long Track, winning it, of course, in '98. And then winning it in 2000 in a brilliant, fantastic performances in 2000 with your wins at Dubeck and Enrum and Harswinkel as well. But yeah, you must have some fond memories of the championship winning seasons that you had in the Grand Prix system.
Yeah, I do. '98 was a good year. To come back after stepping away in '97 to then win it in '98 was very rewarding. Although I didn't enjoy the last round at Mulhoff. I don't know what it was about that place. I never came to grips with it. Don't think I ever won there. I struggled with that place, and I don't know why. Can't put my finger on it. 2000 was a special year, Gareth, because I broke my hip at the end of '99, and I think I'd won the British Grass Track Championship. And the very next day, I broke it at Exeter doing a meeting I shouldn't have been doing, and I couldn't walk until probably March. And my first meeting was Herxheim in May, or it was very late May. And when I went out for the final in Harzewinkel, when it was just drizzling and it was dark and it was miserable and I had to win the final, I had my physiotherapist there and he lifted me on the bike because I couldn't walk. That year was unbelievable. I couldn't walk on Mondays.
Yeah.
I'd had my hip rebuilt with 3 bolts holding it together. And to win the World Championship that year was very special because it was a massive effort from my family, the sacrifices they made, the physiotherapist Paul Ankers that I worked with, without his help, I could never ever have got back on the bike. And wow, to win in Hazelvink around the outside, when I couldn't walk from my pit bay to the pit box to go out for the last race. I'm particularly proud of that because the work that went into that was pretty special.
Yeah, it's incredible. It was a sad day. I mean, I remember clearly thinking that it was sad because, you'd been riding a long time by that point. We knew that, people don't go on forever. And for you to have an accident like that at that stage of your career when you were going so well, I think a lot of us feared that might be it. That might be the end of you for Grasstrack. And I think probably, you might disagree, but I think probably the grass tracks, the British grass tracks that you were competing in at that point, you probably had to make a decision not to take part in so many because they're just so hard on the body at that point. And we all realised that we may have seen those days gone at that point.
That's interesting you say that, because obviously I didn't appreciate that people would understand that, but it was a decision I had to make because obviously being at my right hip and you lean on it so hard, and you twist on it as well, I'd lost a certain amount of mobility in it and it was painful. So riding on certain types of tracks which were bumpy and tight, even though people would say that maybe you didn't like them anyway, the fact is that physically it was just going to destroy me.
Yeah.
And I had to make that I had to step away from those.
Yeah, I do. I remember sort of you couldn't not see really. There was times where I'd just started riding myself at that point and seeing you sort of limping around the pits. It was a stark contrast to the way you'd been before. And often, if you were winning a race or winning the final, you would be visibly knackered by the time you got to the line. You could see that you were tired. And that was a completely new thing. So to win a world title in that condition, Kelvin, I think it's fair to say you can be proud of that. That's all right.
I am proud of it, and I'm pleased you brought it up because it was the work that went into the winter to get to a point, because I couldn't put my foot on the ground for 3 months. I wasn't allowed to, and then to actually do all the rehab to get back to ride, and then actually to win the end of that season. I think and I know that Debbie, my wife, she without the family support, it could not have happened. But I know that, Debbie was there all the way through that, and she had to take me to the hydrotherapy pool every day. And I mean, our lives just basically went on hold so that I could get myself into a position where I could ride. And then to actually repay everybody by winning was very satisfying indeed. And I think probably my best achievement. I think the one against Simon was very special, and we've discussed the reasons why, but in a different sort of way over the course of a year with that injury that in some ways was life-changing at the time, was extra special, and I couldn't ride. For example, I like going to Tetra. I couldn't go to Tetra. Lots of meetings on the continent that were big payers and I earned lots of money from, I couldn't do.
Yeah, it's a shame, and it's it was remarkable really that you then went on to be, if it wasn't for those pesky Germans, Kelvin, you'd have won a few more championships. But then you went on this frustrating run of second places then from sort of, if it wasn't Robert Bart, it was Gerd Riss.
Over it now.
Yeah. If it wasn't Gerd Riss, it was Robert Bath beating you. It was very frustrating that, to watch it as a British fan and for yourself. And I mean, that 2004 New Zealand turnout must have been absolutely devastating, really.
Yes, and that was the hardest point and the hardest thing I've ever experienced in racing, having dominated all year, and then to have had it sort of cruelly stolen away from you. That was particularly difficult to take. And I don't think I think that was a point where really the writing was on the wall then. I was beginning to think, well, I have done it. I've won pretty much every international meeting there is. I've won a few British championships. I've won a European championship. I was 40 something, and I was thinking I've got a serious injury. I knew I was going to have some work done on it. So, I think when that happened, because actually I was due to go for surgery as soon as I got off the plane back from New Zealand. That had already been booked. And I think when I flew home, I just thought, I'm not sure I want to continue. So I think I did ride the next year, but not with any real love, or my heart wasn't in the racing anymore, really, I think.
Mm.
And I would have loved, what I wanted to do and was desperate to do, was to actually retire in New Zealand as world champion. That's what I wanted to do. And that was, I think, really difficult to come to terms with at the time. Jason Crump was very kind, actually, after that meeting. He held my hand a bit because I booed and sobbed and felt sorry for myself for a while. But hey, it wasn't to be. And as I say, these things happen. But it was a tough one to take at the time. And I think it just ripped the enthusiasm out of me.
Yeah. That's really cruel. Really, really cruel. I mean, you were the fastest man there. And
do you know what? In the final, I can remember the final. The final was quite interesting. I'd had a difficult time. I had a belt drive break. And it put me under pressure to make the final. Had to win my last heat to make the final. I only needed to finish 4th in the final. So it just felt like I couldn't feel comfortable. I couldn't relax. It was weird. I can't put my finger on why. I think the expectation levels, we'd been there a while. Anyway, I got to the final and I thought, thank God for that. You know what I mean? I'm going to do it now.
Yeah.
And Gerd made the start and I passed him. And I thought, I don't really need to do that. I genuinely, I think he went wide and they'd track graded and all the dirt was on the inside and he went wide to do a big arc. And I went round the inside and all the grip was there and I just went by him. And I thought, right, okay, well, probably the best place to be out in front, safest place to be. And as I went over the start and finish line to start the last lap, the bike coughed going in the first corner. And then halfway around the first corner, it stopped. And, you would think, well, maybe I should have just ridden around in 3rd place and half throttle and, just babied it home. But as I say, on the start line, you think, well, let's get out of trouble, stay out of trouble. And as I say, I found myself in front. It wasn't as if I was really busting a gut that I felt that I had to win the meeting. I didn't. But I found myself in that position, but it wasn't to be.
No, absolutely devastating. And again, that's also unfortunately on YouTube, I'm afraid. But I think
so will be. But I think I don't. At the time, it was difficult to understand why that had happened.
Yeah.
But I think in some ways, I look back on what I'd previously achieved. There was one year there where I finished second. I finished second 4 times. There was one year where I was particularly aggrieved. Not so much that one because that was beyond my control and beyond anybody's control. It wasn't anybody's particular fault. But the fact is that the one where Robert Bath took his carburettor off in the Parc Fermé and I didn't get any support from the British authorities in England, and his points should have been stripped, I would have been world champion that year, definitely. And that was wrong. Yeah. And the FIM agreed that it was wrong. But the problem was that it was such a complicated and expensive process to appeal. It just wasn't financially worth it. It just wasn't. And that was difficult. That was more difficult to take, actually, Gareth, than what happened. It was very upsetting what happened in 2004. But when Robert Bath took his carburettor off and took it back to his van and would not give it to Don Godden, who was the scrutineer of the day, that just to be fined €250 or whatever it was by the 3 FIM delegates there, that was outrageous. Yeah. It was absolutely outrageous. And that one, actually, for me, is the more difficult one to understand, really.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. It's difficult for me to understand. But I'd hope it wouldn't happen now under today's committee. I would hope that we could do something about that. But
Tony Noel at the time didn't support me.
Right.
And he took the easy route out with a German referee, and I don't know who else was there, but it just went against me. And I obviously wasn't... they didn't look upon me favourably, but that was wrong, man. It was wrong. And I know that... Renzo Giannini at the time, he agreed with me, but the fact is, he said, you got to appeal, and it costs you 10,000 Swiss francs just to appeal.
Right.
And you got to go with a lawyer, and as I say, Grasstrack racing wasn't the highest paid sport in the world, so it just went away. But those years, frustration, very, very consistent. I'd made the best of my injury. I can look back proudly. I represented Great Britain, I think, pretty well. Won Grand Prix, was in with a shout to be world champion every year.
Yeah.
So that year, that period of time from '95 through to 2004, I think I was when I wasn't injured, I was in with a shout every year.
Yeah, and we're still awaiting our next sort of Kelvin Tatum. Really, I think we had some good riders, Andrew Appleton and Paul Hurry, obviously still going well, and Richard Hall.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe he could be the next one. That's what we're hoping. Zach Weiknecht or James Shanes. I mean, James Shanes is incredibly fast on the grass track, and he's still learning on the speedway, on the long track. I'm not sure. Lots of people aren't convinced about him on the speedway at the moment, but I think he's got a lot to give there. But he's certainly a talent. Be interesting to see what they come up with in the next 10 years or so.
Sure.
But your final grass track, rather fittingly for all of the British fans anyway, was at the bonfire burn up at Collier Street, and
I didn't want to go.
Well, it turned out to be a great day.
It was a great day, and I went to Herxheim in May and won, and drove out and said, "That's it, I'm done." And then what were the name of the boys that ran that place?
Yeah, Kevin Drew Still.
There you go. They mithered me for weeks. And I said probably no 4 or 5 times. No. And it wasn't in the end just about money. He paid me very well to go. But in the end, I thought, I'll ride in England and that will be it. I didn't make a song and dance about it. I just thought I'd go. Hadn't ridden since May. And to win, I couldn't believe it. I won. I couldn't believe it. And I was, and I remember it was 6-lap final, wasn't it? 6-lap final. Last 2 laps, mate, I was hanging on for grim dead. Thank God. Actually, it was cool because it had been a good week, hadn't it?
Yeah.
The weather had played its part, and so it was a nice day and a nice way to finish. And was really, really pleased to. And I think the children were there and the family were there, where they weren't in Herxheim in Germany. So it was a real family occasion for us.
Yeah, it was a great performance, and the track was superb that day. Absolutely, probably the best. The last time it was at its absolute best that day, and Richard Hall was chasing you down, hanging off the thing, and Eunice Kilmacorpy was flying, and there was decent riders there, but it was really fitting for you to win that, and lots of people were very pleased, but also sad at the same time because it was definitely. That was it,
yeah,
really.
I think I had a thought about riding a couple of years later and maybe just sort of like cherry picking good meetings and, doing that. And my friend Marcel Gerhard, we were thinking about, just go there and turn up and have a real good go. But to be honest, when you started talking, the money had gone down, obviously you couldn't get the same start money as you did, even as a 3-time world champion. You were only just about covering your costs, and in the end, we shelved it. But I did think about doing that a couple of years later. But in some ways, I'm pleased I didn't. I think I look back on that racing, and it was a fantastic decade I had. I mean, the adventures we went on and where we went I loved it. Going to Tetero and meeting lots of people and having arguments with Hans Zerk, who became like a second dad to me. And I mean, he was very German, but I was very English. And I used to tell him the engines weren't fast enough, but I don't think anybody could quite believe it. Everybody used to go very quiet when he used to come in. So I was quite emotional after practice. I said, engine's not fast enough, Hans. You got to spend some of them Deutschmarks and get some faster engines. But the thing about it is he loved it, because I remember breaking the track record at Rastida, and he was so proud.
Yeah.
He was so proud that I'd done it. And it was his bike, and people were coming around the back of the van looking at it, and he was just so pleased that it had happened. And we went home, and he took me and we sat in his kitchen, we drank a bottle of schnapps, was completely pissed, but he loved it. And I rode at Wolverhampton the next day for my Speedway club and was rubbish, but I didn't care.
Yeah.
But those days, that type of thing, it all happened during that period of time, and I had wonderful support. The Germans that helped me, and Hans Zerk, certainly, Marcel Gerhard, and the family were brilliant. But it was a hell of an adventure. It really was.
Yeah. Yeah, it was. I mean, today obviously your attention is mainly with speedway. I don't know if you follow any of the grass track at all, really. But grass track these days, I think that you sort of alluded to it there. The start money's gone down, and there's just the arse has fallen out of it a little bit. A lot of people seem to think that it's on its decline, and it's a really sad state, especially for somebody like me who's so passionate about grass track. And I appreciate it's a hobby sport, but I love it absolutely. Love the sport, love the sidecars, love the solo, love the whole thing about it. I can take or leave speedway. It must be interesting for you to sort of look back, and I wonder if you were racing nowadays, if you would have even sort of entertained grass track, because I don't think you can make a living out of it anymore.
No, you can't, and I'm not sure, because I possibly would have been, like so many riders, I would have been looking to go to Poland, and I think that when Polish League opened up, I think that was a major blow to grass track racing and the long track scene, because all the top speedway riders disappeared. So you didn't get that international flavour so much, because they could go and ride in Poland and earn more money. And that's a fact. I actually argued with people at the time. I said, you boys are going to have to run on Saturday nights. You're going to have to run these meetings in the summer on Saturday evenings, so that the boys can pick up a grass track meeting and go on to Poland. But unfortunately, there was this sort of blinkered attitude. Grass track and long track racing has certainly contributed to its own demise in some ways.
Yeah.
But I'm with you. It's a cool sport. I know the smell of the grass when you turn up, when you're in the field. The excitement factor of looking at the track and getting the bike set up. Hey, mate, I miss all that, and I don't go. But I remember I went to Herxheim a long time after I hadn't been there, and it was like, wow. And I'm pleased I didn't go back straight away, because I think I probably would have looked at people and I thought, do you know what, I could beat him.
Yeah.
And I would have gone home and bought a bike, that would have happened. So I think that was a conscious decision. But, all those, when you talk about you love it, I can appreciate that very much. And it is sad. And something fundamental has to change to enable grass track to rebuild itself. Speedway has made moves that haven't been good news for grass track, but grass track hasn't moved. You need to, to me, it wasn't the big boy, it wasn't the big player, it never was. So unfortunately, and I know on the continent, if they'd run on Saturday afternoon evenings, they would have actually kept more people involved.
Yeah.
Because you would have been able to double up, and doing a trip where you could do 2 meetings and come home would have been fantastic.
Yeah.
But they were absolutely. I spoke to several German promoters about it. They wouldn't even entertain that. No. But then you look at places. You look at Plattling. You look at these places which still run, but there's nobody there.
Yeah. It's quite hard to watch sometimes. Some of those bigger long tracks that were so popular back in the day. But the thing with grass track, I think, is that there's a lot of tradition in it, I think, and trying to break down tradition is very difficult. But this season, I think there was 2 or 3 meetings, that have sort of talked about running on Saturday. The British Championships was scheduled for a Saturday, which I felt was a really positive move.
Yeah, very much so, and I think that's long overdue. And I think you could you could maybe get some enthusiasm back if you start looking at it and looking a little bit outside the box. You don't have to change the sport and make it a figure of 8 or anything daft like that. But I think that it just needs to be just looked at slightly differently, and it hasn't been. But as I say, I think I was very lucky in the fact that I rode at a time when we still had great crowds. And you go to Marmande and it was full, and Herxheim was 25,000 people, and I mean, wow, those days were incredible. I mean, and to win on those days was very special. I think I'm very lucky to have been able to do that.
Yeah, definitely. They were glory days. They were absolutely well. I know it's very difficult because everybody says you're looking through rose-tinted specs, but you only need to look at the names in a domestic final from 96, when you were at the top of your game, and you'll quickly realise that we are a long way from that now. We've got some exceptional talent in this country at the moment, and we bang on about it all the time on the podcast. James Shanes, Zach Weiknecht are 2 world-class grass track riders. Paul Hurry, although he's long in the tooth now, he's still a brilliant rider. James Wright, who moved over from Speedway and did some grass, was a great rider. Chris Harris is playing around with it. That we have got those world class riders, but it's and there's a lot of youth riders coming through as well. I think the Masters in about 10 years, if we can cling on to all of them and keep the sport going, could be an absolute spectacle. But as we stand at the moment, it's lost its shine, I guess. I don't know. We had it's sort of 10, 15 years of...
I'll tell you an interesting story, is the fact that Ty Wolfenden came to me 18 months ago and said, I want to be World Long Track Champion and I want you to run it for me. And if it had been, because he was talking to Castagna, if Castagna had introduced a world final, he would have done it. Now, if that's the sort of thing that needs to happen to suddenly put the sport back on the map, where you have a 3-time world speedway champion that suddenly, who's British, decides to do the world long track final. Now, that's the sort of dramatic thing that needs to happen to kickstart the sport again, to reinvigorate it, to get the kids to look at it and think, yeah, that's cool, I want to do it.
Yeah.
But they won't do it. So the fact is you're going to get that whole series just drifting on. And without something along those lines, that dramatic, to get those type of people involved that can really capture the imagination of young kids to actually young speedway stars, then it's going to be very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree. I mean, we had a couple, I think it was either last year or the year before, a video popped up online of Nicky Pedersen on a long track bike going around Herxheim. And suddenly the buzz,
Yeah, exactly. So there's a case in point. He spoke to me about it because he wanted me to go there, and I said, I'm not going there. But he then decided against it because obviously when he dropped out of the Grand Prix, when I'd had a conversation with Ty Wolfenden, and it was in Denmark actually on the Saturday morning of a Grand Prix, and Pete Adams was with him, and they'd actually approached me about the possibility of him doing long track racing, and he actually bought a bike and he did get quite excited about it, but then I think fixtures and bits and pieces just curtailed that. But from the point of view with the riders you've spoken about, with Zach Weigneck and James Shanes and one or two others, I think that there's one or two about. But I think a real shot in the arm is if you got a proper high-profile speedway rider to come in and give it a lift. But the only way I see that really happening is that long track and grass track cannot just continually be tried to be made the same and made to look the same and run the same as speedway. It isn't the same. It is not the same. It has a different mentality, it has a different philosophy. The meetings are all day, they're not over in 2 hours. It's not the same environment entirely, and I think a mistake has been made in that way to try and make it the same.
Yeah, I think so. And a lot of criticism comes from the fact that there aren't, you don't get the TV exposure. Obviously, the TV exposure was a massive deal for Speedway, but you can expose live Speedway meetings because it's all done in an evening. But you can't do a grass track like that. I think lots of people moan because it's not on telly, but you couldn't have a live grass track, all day. It's an all-day event. You couldn't do it. You couldn't have a 7-hour program.
The money required to do that on the scale that was done for Speedway would have been just impossible. To say again, you possibly could have had shortened programs and specific meetings done for that, and maybe that could be looked at where it is. If you're running in the evenings, you made a slightly curtailed program where it's a bit more condensed, and then you have social activities that are incorporated with it afterwards to try and make it an evening out for everybody to attract younger people as well as just the racing people. But I think, something thought outside the box. But I truly believe one of the major errors, and this is not something I do in hindsight, we actually felt this at the time when we opted out, the top riders opted out of the World Championship. We didn't really agree with the Grand Prix series being introduced in '97, so my feelings aren't any different now, really.
Yeah, and it's success starts at the top, and the top of the sport is where you look for where things are going, I think, and obviously Speedway, the top of the sport, the Grand Prix system is, it's brought so much success to it's filtered itself down. I mean, we're in a bit of a lull at the moment, particularly in this country with speedway, but certainly in Poland, it's took off. It's incredible, and you're looking at the depth of riders. That's what you were talking about on your podcast. Is the depth of riders over there? It's terrifying, really.
That isn't going to change anytime soon. That's going to be pretty much par for the course. They are a powerhouse now. But talking about and thinking about grass track racing, as I say, reflecting on where I was when things were going really well to what is happening now, I'm not sure just staying with the same format is going to turn things around. Something has to change on that, and I think grass track racing needs to do that. I know why the FIM don't want to change it, because the more events they run, the more revenue they get. So they don't want to drop that Grand Prix, even if they don't. You have 4 or 5, 6 meetings around Europe that aren't particularly well attended. And I do know at times they're on exactly the same weekends as Speedway GPs.
Yeah.
So again, that's a very difficult one to then get people to do both. But personally, a shortcut to it, because the Grand Prix is so high profile, with if you've got 1 or 2 guys to cross over because they could fit it into their calendar, I think that would be a huge boost. And I know Woofenden wanted a World Long Track Championship on his CV. That's why he wanted to do it. But that isn't going to happen while the format remains this way. With all due respect to Zach Weiknecht, Paul Hurry, James Shanes, even if they won the World Championship next season, or this season, I don't know if it'll even happen this year. I'm not sure. I'm not privy to that. But the fact of the matter is, it's still not going to transform it. But if somebody like Woofenden did at a world final, which would have televised television potential, I think that would be massive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it really would. I mean, it's just, I think we agree really here that it's just not happening.
Think about it, he would do that. And I think you'll find if he did it, you'd find 1 or 2 other guys that would be tempted to have a go at it as well. Not all of them. Possibly the Polish boys wouldn't be tempted, but some of the Scandinavians maybe. Some of the riders that have just come out of the GPs might look at that and think, yeah, like a Nicky Pedersen. Can you imagine Nicky Pedersen doing a World Long Track final?
Yeah.
I mean, it would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Like you said, just that clip where he was riding around, where was it? Trying to think where he was.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've got a feeling it was Herxheim, but I'm not sure.
No, it wasn't Herxheim. I think it was either Schiesel. I think it was Schiesel he was at. I just thought, wow, that's it. That will put the spotlight back on it. You get guys like that there. So, hey, we shall see.
Yeah, we hope so. We do hope so, because it does filter down all of that success, I think, for sure. So we'll just have to wait and see, really.
Shortcuts it, Gareth. It shortcuts it, know. So, maybe that might be a way of transforming it. But no, I do miss not going to grass track, I think. Yeah, I do.
Do you miss riding?
I ride a bit on some vintage and classic motocross meetings, so I love that. I did miss the racing, and I was lucky enough to do some speedway testing with Marcel Gerhard with his GTR engine, which was fun. I did a lot of that with him. But it's not something you can just go and do for fun, really, is it? You can't. There aren't tracks everywhere where you can pay £30 and ride for a day. So it's quite restrictive in that way. But yes, the simple answer, yes. Yeah,
I know that your brother, he had a bit of a foray in the upright class. He didn't really hang around doing it for too long, but he obviously looked at doing something after a speedway career. But you never found yourself heading towards the EVLS or anything like that.
I don't know too much about it. I think it would have been. I don't know if many of the high-profile riders that have won world championships have elected to do that. You would know better than me, but I know riding an upright grass track bike, a nice one, would have been great fun because they're great bikes to ride. In some ways, they're better to ride than a lay down. But I wasn't tempted to do that. No, I wasn't. No. I think you'd find yourself being a huge target.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You'd have absolutely nothing to win and everything to lose with the reputation you come with. That is a drawback, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can understand that. I think your brother, he felt a little bit of that. I think I remember he turned up for the British Grasstrack Upright Championship, and it poured with rain, unfortunately. And I think he had a very good engine, but obviously was deemed completely useless when the heavens opened.
I think I would have revelled in that, wouldn't I?
Yeah, you'd have been fine, absolutely. So yeah, you've travelled obviously all over the world in your career, and it wasn't until I started looking up for this that I realised you were Australian long track champion as well, which I never even realised was a thing. I know they do a bit of long track, but you must have, and you've sort of said before, there are loads of things that we could talk for another couple of hours really, but what if you think back through your racing career, your grass track and long track racing career, is there anything that really sticks out as, that was magic, that was a good day, that was a bad day, that was, that we haven't really talked about?
I think there was a British Masters that I lost to Paul Hurry, where my gearbox packed up in a race, and he nicked it away from me. Paul was right there. He gave himself every opportunity because he kept giving himself a chance by hanging in there. And I can't remember what year that was. You may have to look that up. But
could be 97. That one possibly.
Was it? Yeah. And that was frustrating because I'd won. I think I was winning most of the races. But in one race, I think I had a problem, and I ended up losing that. That was frustrating. I think that one of the main achievements was actually to be able to win at home, because I can remember Tony Knoll quite clearly coming over to me saying to me, Kelvin, it's very much a surprise that that you're able to cope with riding in the UK now. And I just looked at him and I thought, I'm just having a bit of luck now. I really couldn't go into the details. But it did strike me sort of, I thought, oh, thanks. But so that was quite an achievement. As I explained, it wasn't the greatest discipline that I enjoyed, but it was a challenge and one that I conquered, I think.
Yeah.
The one that stands out, the most disappointing moment was 2004 by far. Nothing compared to that. It's, running up to that, nothing like that. I mean, that was brutal.
Yeah.
But I had lots and lots of smashing days, fantastic days. Winning at Tetero for the first time, with my dad there, who won there in 1960. I mean, and Zerke was there, and that was his backyard where he used to live in the East Zone, where his dad had a transport company, Ernst Zerke, and I mean, those were fantastic days. 40,000 people there. I mean, that's pretty cool. Riding 5 meetings in 3 days, where you rode Tetero Saturday, then you rode at Gustro in the evening on the speedway, again on Sunday at Tetero, and again on Gustro Sunday evening, and then driving home and getting to Hazewinkel and doing the long track meeting on the way home, and actually winning all 5 meetings in 3 days. Those were pretty special weekends.
Yeah, pretty special and pretty unique as well. I don't think many can do that, can say they've done that. But
I was quite tired.
Yeah, I can imagine you probably were, especially Tetero. I mean, Tetero, we talked to, obviously, Trevor Banks is huge advocate of Tetero, one of his favourite places to go. And it was an incredible place. It still is.
Trevor was very good there, and he quite clearly loved it. And so did Simon, and so did I. And it was a fantastic battle when the three of us were there. We weren't always there together, unfortunately, but it was a fantastic place to go. And the atmosphere and the way you were received was just incredible. And Trevor really raised his game. I mean, he was I generally could beat him at a conventional grass track, but there, I tell you, he was a different animal. And he was tough. So, yeah, he was certainly one to be respected big time. And, of course, Simon, who had been there for a while, again, his professionalism, sort of, you understood that. So you knew you were going to be in for it. I remember the first final I had with him there on the 5th lap, because it was 5 laps. We came over the Hexman over the far side into the right-hander over the back, which is flat out. And I got alongside him there, and there's a rail on the inside. And Simon went through there on the inside, and I tried to go round him on the outside of a right-hander. And I remember I ran out of vision and I went for a tear off and I hit the rail on the inside as we were going down the hill. And I just thought, I think second will have to do today.
One thing that Trevor said is it's as much as he loved it, it was so dangerous. He had more accidents there than he had anywhere else in his entire career.
I saw him crash. Actually, he passed me. I remember one year we were in the handicap final and we were coming down the hill the first time, and it was important to pass as many people as possible on the first lap because we went off the back, and he came by me like I was stopped at the bottom, and I thought, and it funnels at the bottom. It goes very wide and it goes very narrow. And unfortunately for Trevor, he ran out of room and he hit the fence really hard. I mean, frightened the life out of me when I watched him. And he just ran out of room trying to go around a couple of guys. But yeah, he did have one or two spills. I was lucky enough to get away scot-free there. I had an engine failure that cost me a win. In actual fact, one year it was raining there where I normally exploit, and I was a long way in front, and Robbie Bart was second, and my throttle stuck flat out going up the hill. And I managed to do half a lap just controlling it on the clutch, but then killed the clutch completely and had to give best to it. But no, it was a spectacular place to go and race.
Yeah, people light up whenever I talk to them about the Tetero burgering. Everyone does light up. I think the last thing really I think we must mention really is sort of a lot of your World Championship times were on a new track. And Dave Lord, obviously a big part of that, and he's still today very much involved with Zach Weitneck's development. But obviously your time with New Track really was an amazing time, because it was a time where New Track went from doing a few bikes to nearly everybody having one.
Yeah, that was an interesting period. I won the World Championship in '95, and I'd been looking at these bikes kicking about every now and again that were beautifully made, but they weren't right. And at the end of the season, I rang Dave Lord. I didn't know him from Adam. And I just said, I introduced myself and I explained what I wanted to do. And I said that I wanted him to make the forks for my Jawa bike that I was riding. And I wanted him to make some components for it because he made really cool stuff. And I wanted to do a deal with him where I would try and develop the bike with him during that year. And he was in full agreement with that because he didn't want me to jump as world champion onto a bike that I then gave back. So he developed, I think it was 2, possibly 3 different rolling chassis for me to try periodically through that year. The first 2 I didn't like. And then right at the end of the season, he delivered a bike to me that was a New Track, single shock, rising rate suspension, different geometry for Collier Street right at the end of the year, and I won. And I said, this is it. And then from that moment on, I had the best bikes. I tell you, he was an artist with them. His welding, his attention to detail, there's nobody better. And he and I fed off each other because we got a great relationship. He's a northerner, I'm a southerner, but his workmanship was superb. Jane, his wife, was smashing as well. We got on really well. And my bikes, I can remember once at Farkirchen, my bike went through the weight limit at 78 kilos, and the limit was 85, so a long way under. And one of the Trésors was behind me in the queue on a New Track, and his bike was 89 kilos. And he just looked at me as I was wheeling my bike out, thinking, crikey, I've got a lot of trouble to put a lot of ballast on my bike. And he just said to me, he said, we're going home now. He said, there's no point in racing. But he made me these beautiful bikes that were very thin gauge, beautifully light, titanium everywhere. It was fantastic, Gareth. They're brilliant bikes, and I owe a lot to him. And I think they had a great journey as well. We won 2 World Championships. Yeah,
and obviously now it's not New Track, it's Track Plus now, and that was what Zach Weitneck was riding at the European Championships that he won. So it's still going.
Dave will make a bike that can win. There's no doubt about that. And to say, it's great that he's back. He left the sport to focus on making wheelchairs for a disabled sportsman. And the company then, I think something went wrong, and he's come back to the sport, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
As I say, he makes great bikes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Kelvin, I'm eternally grateful for the time you've given us today, and for the honesty that we've gone through everything. But we've both agreed that we've literally just touched the surface, really, with so many things. And I suppose when you have a career as long as and as successful as yours, it's very difficult to condense it into a podcast situation. So we'll definitely have to have you on again. But obviously, once again, it's important to plug your podcast, because we very much enjoyed that. It's not about Grasstrack, it's about speedway. Although Steve Johnston very briefly mentioned Grasstrack, and my ears pricked up. But
well, he was European champion, wasn't he? So I had to mention that, because he was only out there for a while. I don't know why he didn't kick on after winning that, because he sort of disappeared. But that was a pretty cool. That was for an Aussie boy who'd only been in Europe for a short period of time, to win the European title was actually quite a feather in his cap. Yeah.
The only non-European to ever have won that particular championship as well. Unusual to be a European champion and be Australian, but perhaps that's another discussion. But
sure, no problem, Gareth. If you want to do something later in the summer or whenever, then I very much appreciate you pushing Nigel and our podcast. It's very kind. But it would be good to sort of delve a little bit deeper into some of the backstories about what really went on.
Yeah, it would be fascinating. Absolutely brilliant. So that's it from this interview, a very special interview with Kelvin. So thank you to Kelvin for his time and for talking to us about Grasstrack. And hopefully, Kelvin, we see you at a Grasstrack at some point, because I know. Although the only thing is, I listened to the Tony Ricardson one, and he said he doesn't like going to Speedway because he's constantly being people coming up to him talking to him, and I think you'd have the same problem at a Grasstrack.
Yeah, I went back to Herxheim a few years ago, and it was a lot of people. I ended up talking all day.
Yeah.
And you miss quite a lot of it, but that's a nice problem to have, in truth. Let's. I don't know when that will be. Possibly won't be this year, of course, because we might not have the opportunity to. But I'm sure, given the right time, that I'll pop up and enjoy a day out at a Grasstrack.